Thanks for sticking around. This week provided ample opportunity that the Republicans are refusing to accept the olive branches that the DFL Governor Mark Dayton and our DFL caucus has offered. The commissioners have been negotiating in good faith on a number of bills like permitting and the alternative teacher licenses, the governor took swift action on the environmental permitting bill. We're waiting for the legislative auditor's report on that bill. Unfortunately, the Republican leaders have not engaged reciprocally, have not engaged in the other direction with the governor. And we hope that as we move forward here, that dynamic changes. We offered numerous amendments on the floor on some of these bills, which I think would have actually improved the bills, but those weren't accepted, except for one. Despite clear indications that the governor wanted a full and fair budget put on the table, not the reckless budget that was passed through, the GOP really did not engage with the governor at all, and goaded the governor into a veto. And I don't think that that's the direction we need to be heading. The Republicans have promised they wouldn't increase taxes. This bill that the governor vetoed yesterday clearly increased property taxes. I think on the NPR website they did a fact check on it and proved that, in fact, there's going to be nearly $500 million in property tax increases had that bill become law. The Republicans have said they wanted to do things differently, but we haven't seen that so far. Really, it's been about games playing. I was disappointed yesterday that Senator Michelle, in response to the governor's veto, his response was, well, game on, right? I think that's how they're trying to set up this session, in contrast to the vision that Governor Dayton laid out in his State of the State, and I think from the very day that he was sworn in about trying to work in a bipartisan fashion. That's what we want to accomplish. As we move forward here, that's what Minnesotans expect us to accomplish as we move forward here. And I've been disappointed with the tone that's been set by the Republican leadership thus far on those grounds. And remember that the biggest promise that the Republicans made on the campaign trail is that as we kind of head into next week and we see what Governor Dayton and his budget looks like, remember that the Republicans have promised they're going to put a $32 billion budget together that includes no new revenues from any source whatsoever. That's what they told the people of Minnesota that they'll do. And I really do look forward to seeing that budget, because then I think we can start to have an honest conversation about what Minnesotans expect their state to look like in the future.
So the thing that I have been most disappointed about is the partisan tone, and I spoke about it on the Senate floor yesterday. If you look at the first couple large bills that have come through, the votes on the board have strictly been the Republicans on one side, the Democrats on the other. And the thing that I think we would all do best to remember is that there was no mandate in November, that our state elected a Democratic governor and elected a Republican legislature. The people of Minnesota have said they preferred divided government, they continue to do it that way, and they expect us to work together. So I'm hopeful that in the future, if we're to pass legislation, rather than just go through a meaningless exercise, that the Republican leadership will come to the Democrats who are knowledgeable in those subject areas and say, let's work together. Let us craft bills and legislation and policy that actually have the chance to become law and will move Minnesota forward. So that was one thing that struck me pretty starkly yesterday on the Senate floor. Again, with regard to the bill that the governor vetoed, the governor made it very clear from day one that he wanted to have a complete budget, that he would not support a piecemeal approach to budgeting. And in fact, no surprise then that he vetoed that bill.
You say you want to avoid, or you're disappointed by the partisan tone, but some of your own authors, at least in the House, of amendments, told us they haven't even, when we ask if you think you've got a chance of passing your amendment, they said they haven't even talked to the Republicans. How is that helping out to eliminate partisan tone?
They should be, and I think a couple of the amendments actually were discussed with the Republicans. Some of them had success, some of them didn't have success. That's something that we all have to work on. There's no question about it. But what we ought to be doing is actually engaging before we get to the floor on some of these issues. And I think if you have watched the committee process on a number of these bills, there hasn't been the time offered to kind of have full discussion in the committee process as we rush these bills through the process. And so I think that there's times all along the way where we could be engaging Democrats in a more meaningful way. And I know on several of these bills, there's also been discussions where legislators have engaged behind the scenes and their efforts haven't been taken into account once we get to the floor.
By making the budgetary process all or none, doesn't that possibly make it harder to get something done? By not doing it in a piecemeal process?
Well, I think that if you were setting forward your budget for, say, I had a 20-year career in business, so I always look at it like that. If I was to set forward my spending priorities, I would begin with, what is my strategic plan? I mean, what are my objectives? What is my vision? I wouldn't take one tiny piece of my overall program and figure that out first. I would start with a plan, and then I would look at what do I need to do to get to that plan, and what does it cost, and what are the risks, and what are the opportunities, and what are the challenges. And I would take the time necessary to do a very thoughtful and meaningful analysis so that when I did put forward my budget, I could defend it. It would make sense to people. I would have brought other people into the process along the way so that there would be buy-in and it wouldn't be a contentious process. As an executive, I was responsible for a division in a public company, and the things that we did weren't contentious because people were part of the process. I think that's how you govern, that's how you do anything.
The GOP leadership keeps citing that they're really talking to Dayton all the time. Do you two feel that also? Are you communicating with the other side? Do you feel it?
Do we feel like we're communicating? We have meetings every week, but I also have to say that, for instance, some of the appointments to some of the commissions where they disregarded, minority recommendations of who ought to be on those commissions. There hasn't been a tone of bipartisanship coming from the Republican leadership when it comes to the substance of matters. And we saw that on some of the bills, in particular the budget bill, where you have a half-an-hour conference committee, no Democrats involved, not really any engagement with the governor. So I don't think that there's been a real substantive effort at outreach, notwithstanding a very nice offer of cookies today.
Has the governor consulted with you on budget suggestions?
I think the governor's taking input from a lot of people, and he's taken input from some of the legislators in our caucus. But it's going to be the governor's budget, and they are, is from what I know. So they've been open to suggestions, but they're putting together the budget themselves.
I'm sorry, what is your biggest fear moving into Tuesday in terms of what the governor's going to release in terms of his budget? What are you worried about the most?
No. Well, I think the governor's been very clear about what his priorities are, and Minnesotans won't be surprised whatsoever to see, what I expect is going to be in his budget. So I don't think I'll be particularly surprised either.
That wasn't my question, though. My question is, what are you worried about in terms of the cuts? What cuts are you most concerned about moving forward?
Yeah, go ahead.
The thing that I have been concerned about is the governor has been clear about where he stands with regard to revenue, but he also talks about a balanced approach and has acknowledged that that means there will be also a great deal of cuts, and yet I haven't yet heard the governor articulate where those cuts are coming from. So I am concerned because I can't imagine, in this first pass where the cuts will be. I didn't like already that we cut $32 million from children who needed our protection, or children with mental health needs. I'm concerned that in the past several years we have made some pretty deep cuts, and so I don't know where these cuts are going to come from, and I'm concerned about that.
Maybe suggest any ideas of where he could cut.
Well, the thing that I go back to is I think that we need some time to figure out how we can re-engineer and restructure all of the way we deliver government services. And I believe there's great savings to be found, but that isn't quick. And so the challenge is, how do you book those savings now so that you don't have to make the kind of drastic cuts? Because if you can actually find a different way to deliver what you're doing, then your overall cost of doing business goes down. I think there are those savings to be found, but it'll take time. And so in the meantime, we have an obligation to balance the budget, and so cuts will have to be made.
So, and I think the governor's been very clear that he's going to have to make cuts that none of us are going to want to have to make, just like the Republicans and all of us ultimately are going to have to do to get this budget resolved.
Do you think the governor can, once he proposes this budget, actually sell the revenue piece that presumably will be in there?
Well, you know, he ran throughout a campaign on telling the people in Minnesota, you know, kind of this is how I'm going to solve the budget in broad terms, and he won the election. So he was able to sell Minnesotans on the broad terms of what I expect to see in his budget on Tuesday throughout the campaign and won election. So yes, I think he's going to, you know, I think that the main point that is really important here is what he is talking about is a budget solution. And he articulated in the State of the State where we actually are kind of sharing the sacrifice broadly and we're sharing the chance at prosperity broadly, which is in contrast to what we've seen over the last decade in terms of how we resolve the budgets. That's what I expect to see in his budget next week, and I think most Minnesotans would agree that those two principles, those two values are where Minnesota ought to be as we work on kind of getting this huge crisis behind us.
And there will be give and take. You know, the governor, the way the process works, the governor puts forward his budget first, and then the legislature has 5 months to figure it out, to go back and forth, to take public testimony, to find out what really makes the most sense. And so that process will begin too. And I don't think anybody expects that, you know, it's going to be smooth sailing and everybody's going to come to agreement right in the beginning. But I do believe that by May, whatever that date is, that we are going to have an agreement.
Anything else?
Senator Newman was accused of engaging in pay-to-play politics during the ethics hearings he faced this week. Your thoughts on those accusations, and the question arose as well of how legislative assistants working with the GOP caucus are trained to do their job and how they are trained to interact with constituents that want to meet with the senator who might not have supported him during the campaign.
Well, I'll take that question. That was a very unfortunate incident. People, I assume, understand that there was an email sent to some woman who was with the Minnesota nurses asking to meet with Senator Newman, and then Senator Newman's office sent forward an email saying that because that organization had given to his opponent that they wouldn't be meeting with him. And I think that raises alarm bells for all of us, because we believe that as senators, once we're elected, or representatives, we don't just represent those who voted for us. We represent all of the people in our district. And so what does that mean if you have to, you know, if access is determined by support or money? The concern that I had throughout that process, and I wasn't in there, and I think it's important that we respect that process. There was a fair hearing, and they said that there was not, their conclusion was there was not probable cause, that Senator Newman knew about that email. That's a concern, if that is really the case. That's a concern because we ought to have a better working relationship with our legislative assistants, that they would know you would never say that. And so, yeah, that's a concern that a new freshman senator doesn't have that relationship with that legislative assistant such that an email like that would come out.
How do your legislative assistants, do you train them? Who trains them?
I will tell you that my legislative assistant, I don't know if he's sitting in here, but I am very tough on my legislative assistant in that I expect the highest standards. He gets, I've had 2 legislative assistants. Each legislative assistant has stayed with me for 3 years, and they are highly trained. At every minute, we have a system where they put draft emails. I look at the draft. I tell them what was right, what wasn't. It's not easy to be my legislative assistant, so I hire them.
But you look at every outbound email then?
I look at anyone that could possibly have controversy surrounding it, and then we get a system of where my legislative assistant understands where I stand on a particular issue, so eventually I'll stop looking at that subject area because we're clear about that. But.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I am.